Welcome, everybody, to the Inner Carnivore Podcast, episode 20, with my special guest, Valerie Smith. Before we get in, whether you guys are streaming this on your favorite podcast platform, iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, or watching the full video on YouTube, you could do a huge favor. Like, subscribe, leave a review, comment if available. It helps out immensely. And we really appreciate everybody that does and everybody that tunes in on a weekly basis. So jumping right in, how are you, Valerie?
I'm honored to be here.
I'm super glad that you're here. I know we had some scheduling. One being
the grandchild that was born.
The grandchild. How is the grandchild doing?
He's good. He is. My daughter went into labor the very day we were supposed to do.
I felt bad. I was like, absolutely go. Like, this is the least important thing in the world right now. Like, that's super awesome. That's very, very good.
He is 5 weeks old, and he's just adorable. He's just adorable. And my daughter and son-in-law only live about 15 minutes away, so it's not a long trek to visit and go see them. So it's wonderful. Mm-hmm.
That's super cool. That's super awesome. So I've been following you for quite a while. For people that don't know, Valerie, I followed her both on Instagram and Twitter. You have one of the more remarkable stories when it comes to low carb and carnivore. And most people, when they think, especially diet, right? When they think of these diet transformations, they think of people losing 100 pounds, 200 pounds. I had a gentleman, Eric, which I believe you follow on Eric Couch, who's lost like 200 pounds.
Yeah.
That's typically what people think, right? When they think of diet success stories. You're basically the opposite, right? Like, and it's not physical. Like, you have one of the more remarkable mental transformations. So I know you've been on a bunch of podcasts. You've shared your story. I've shared your story a number of times. For people who haven't heard, in a short, like, summary synopsis, where were you and where are you now? Like, how did you get to where you are now?
Okay. I'm going to be 54 in March, and I've been healed for 6 years. From the ages of 14 to 48, and even before I was 14, I was very, very ill. I was diagnosed with 6 different categories of mental illness, and I couldn't function at all. I was in and out of hospitals, mental wards, eating disorder wards. Over the course of the years, I've had 12 psychiatrists. I've been on and off 9 different very heavy psych meds that was supposed to help that never helped except for made me a zombie. The things that I experienced first was anorexia. The drive to starve is so strong, and that isn't something that you can walk away from. And that started as a younger child, and then actually diagnosed at 14. And the other things that I experienced along the way, because it gets worse as you get older, and the times when I would try to be what they consider weight restored, which was always on carbs, because the hospitals that I was in, the dietitians would push vegan or plant-based. And so it was all highly processed, muffins, cakes. If you can eat these things, then you'll be well. And that was never my experience. And everyone that I talk to, it's not their experience either. You can be weight restored on carbs, but the mental illness component, the brain component is still there. No matter what I weighed, none of what I experienced ever lessened. So I was diagnosed with anorexia, severe clinical depression, anxiety, panic attack and panic disorder. And one of the worst ones, I'd say equally as bad as the anorexia, was schizoaffective disorder. And what I experienced was voices that screamed in my head 24 hours a day. It did not let up, ever. My only escape was sleep. And the way I describe it is like when you're watching an action movie and someone is trying to get information from someone, and they'll put them down in a pit and they'll blare music or they'll blare whatever for hours and hours. That's what it felt like to be in my head. These voices would scream death at me, just awful messages, awful dark messages, and they wouldn't go away. And when the two times that I was weight restored within that 35-year period, two more diagnoses happened that I never thought would ever occur. When I wasn't actively starving, the self-harm turned into something else, and that is when I began having severe OCD, and that led to cutting my arms and legs and a condition called trichotillomania, which is hair pulling. I was pulling out all of my scalp hair, my eyebrows, my eyelashes. That was the self-harm that I morphed into when I wasn't starving. And then I would relapse and starve again, and then the cutting and the hair pulling would subside. It was just a horrible, vicious cycle. Awful. And I did everything in traditional treatment, like I mentioned, and there wasn't anything that ever helped. And so in 2016, 2017, I was back down again for most of those years anyway, except for those two times I was weight restored. I'm 5'9", and I was 78 pounds. That's a BMI of 11. And so, of course, nothing was functioning. I was basically bedridden. I couldn't hold my own body temperature. I had gone through some very major medical complications also. Starvation just wreaks havoc on your organs and on your body. And so I'd had many major surgeries also. And you would think that in itself would make you want to get better or do better, but it's mental illness. That doesn't change what's going on in your brain. So in 2016, 2017, that was when we first got our first smart TV and internet, because we live out in the country. And so I found a couple books at the library that was about relating diet to mood and the brain. And I'd never explored that before. No one had ever said what I ate could impact my mental health. I hadn't eaten any protein or fat in 35 years. And at the point of 2017, I was only eating spinach and celery, about 100 calories a day. And I would count every single calorie, and it was obsessive. So, of course, there wasn't anything going in that was going to heal anything.
Yeah, for sure.
So I found Dr. Georgia Ede on YouTube. I found Dr. Chris Palmer. I found some other people that started challenging my thoughts that maybe it's not about just gain weight and you'll be better. Because I knew that didn't work. I've been doing this for 40 years. And so they started talking about the neurotransmitters in the brain. There's like 9 main ones, but there's over 100 neurotransmitters in your brain. And those neurotransmitters can only function and be plentiful from amino acids. And where do we get amino acids? Animal products. And I started to have a glimmer of hope. And so starting that was difficult. Like I said, I hadn't eaten meat in over 30 years. So I set myself on a plan. This was my last thing to try. There was nothing left. I didn't want to be alive anymore. And the only thing I could make myself do was eat an ounce of fat-free chicken. And I sat at the kitchen table and just bawled, forcing myself to do this. Because the voices would then scream that I didn't deserve to eat. You don't deserve this. But I kept on. And with the help and support of my husband, because it was rough, I would cry for hours. And then he would remind me, there's nothing to go back to. the only way through this is through, and you have to try something, because you're not going to survive any longer. So the chicken was mild, so that's where I started, and put myself on a plan. Every week I would add another ounce, and when I got to about 8 ounces a day, I had been binge watching Ken Berry and Sean Baker, my heroes. And I was able to switch over to ground beef. And then from there, I started making whole chuck roasts in the crock pot, continually adding another ounce. About 6 months in, things started to change. Things started to get better. The voices that I heard that screamed at me were now like in another room with the door closed. They were still there, but it was much quieter. The OCD and the cutting and the hair pulling was not like it was anymore. The body dysmorphia, looking in the mirror and actually seeing what I actually looked like, which I'd never experienced in the 40 years of my illnesses, I began to see what I actually looked like and didn't like it. And that was a huge brain shift. When you're anorexic, that's all you can think about, is trying to be as skeletal as possible. You idolize those that you see that are just horribly emaciated. So I kept on and kept increasing the amount that I was eating. And it was kind of like at that point, I knew I was a little better. I didn't know how much better I would get, but I would take anything that I could get. So that was when I went all in and just did beef, salt, and water. I eliminated the spinach and the celery because I was learning more about the lion diet. And I had a lot of physical illness also. And so I wanted to see if any of my physical illnesses could also get better as I was getting better mentally. And at the 12-month mark, 1 year, people think that's a long time, but it's not. After you've suffered for 4 decades, a year is nothing.
Yeah, for sure.
And at the 1 year mark, right around there, everything went away. The voices are completely gone. I have a calm, joyful mind, just overflowing with vibrant joy every day. And everything else went away. I tried hard for years to stop the cutting, and I promised myself I'm not going to do it today. And, and this was different. My brain healed, and I could look at that activity and say, what am I doing this for? This is horrible. And I was able to just walk away because my brain healed because of the flooding of nutrients I was putting in of so much beef. It healed my brain of the mental illnesses. And everything that I experienced is completely gone. There's no panic attacks. There's no anxiety. There's no depression. There's no OCD. The anorexia is gone. I can eat anything I want to eat now. I choose to eat the foods that healed me, but I don't look at any food now and say, oh my gosh, I could never eat that. That's a fear food, or I wish I could eat, none of that is there anymore. And of course, like I said, the voices are gone. So, and 20 physical illnesses healed over the course of that time also. And the second year had so many physical issues that I didn't know were related to the need of protein and fat, whether it be osteoporosis, hypothyroid, all those different hormonal issues, or the issues that I experienced from the vegetables that were harming me. I had oxalate toxicity, and that was causing a lot of female issues that doctors told me would never get any better. And they're all healed. So that was 6 years ago. And I knew when I healed completely that I somehow needed and wanted to get involved. I needed to start speaking about this because it's not out there. And I knew that I would probably be the unicorn of the group because of what has healed, although I've met so many wonderful people on Twitter and Instagram that have healed mental issues also. But I knew I wanted to get involved. I don't want anyone to suffer the 40 years that I suffered. And it's needless because it's food. I mean,
Right.
it, you can heal so much and have an awesome life. And that trickles into your family, your spouse, your children. I'm able to now redeem the time with all of them because I wasn't the person I wanted to be all those years. So life is great. Life is wonderful. And
I absolutely,
I out eat a lot of men's.
for sure. And I love your story. The thing that I can't get my head around is, so obviously you had interactions with doctors during this time period, right?
Yes.
Was there ever a moment that the light went off and they went, "Oh my gosh, you're like, we've missed this"? Or, because here's the thing that's really frustrated me, and I've talked to a lot of people who have had, especially the physical ailments, right? And
Yep.
doctors keep putting them on medications or keep
Yes.
recommending this, and then it changes, and then they go, "Well, I mean, I guess if it's working, keep doing it." There's not this, "Oh my gosh, this might be a treatment option to look into." Was there ever that with you? Because this is not like, "Hey, I was on thyroid medication and now I'm off." This was, my life is unlivable and now it's livable. So
Mm-hmm.
what was the reaction from the doctors, and was there anybody who said, "Oh my goodness, this could be a game changer"?
No, not a single doctor would acknowledge that I could use food to change my life. Not a single one. They won't acknowledge it, and it's extremely frustrating. I could spend my time being angry, you know, um, and I do get angry, but I'm not going to sit in it. I'm not going to give them any more years of my life, any more power over me to sit in anger over mistreatment, over the system is so corrupt. The system is so off kilter because that's all they want to do is throw meds at it and stick to the same model that they've always stuck to, that you need to eat carbs and sugar to put weight on, and your anorexia will go away. And they will not budge from that. They won't. And the protocol now is the same as it was 40 years ago. I have come alongside a couple of teenage girls recently and visited them in the hospital. And I was on a feeding tube several times, and so are these girls. The same crap through that feeding tube is the same stuff that they put through to me. It's canola oil, soy, and high fructose corn syrup. And this is put through the feeding tube 6 times a day. What is that doing for your brain except for causing more anxiety and more inflammation? It's not doing anything for you. So no, I've never encountered a medical doctor, a psychiatrist, a dietitian that I dealt with within inpatient, anyone connected to me, to my case. They won't know. They will not acknowledge that there's a food component and that the mental illness can be helped through nutrition. They won't.
And that, like, people will ask me specifically, because and my personality, like, I like to poke, right? I like to, if somebody has a questionable view that I think is wrong, like, I have no problem, like, getting it out there.
Me too. That's what I like about you.
And
Every once
people
in a
have,
while, I'll pull out a zinger. I'm like, okay, this one's not, no, I have to highlight this one. You're not getting by with this one. What you're saying is stupid.
yeah, and people, I've had multiple people be like, hey, why does it matter? Like, just do you. And I'm like, the reason that it matters. So when I started my whole carnivore thing, I'm coming up on about a year. My intention was not to be confrontational at all. Like I have an extensive background in sports and sports sciences and personal training, and that was not my intention. Was to be confrontational. I actually intended not to even have like my face be a part of it. Like it was just I was just going to post stuff about it because I
Right.
thought it was great. And it was partway through when I started talking to people and realizing the success that they were having. But then I realized the uphill battle that people were fighting, and it's not just, hey, eat whatever you want. Like
Yeah.
that's not what it is, because at the end of the day, 99% of people go to their doctor if there's a problem,
Right.
right? If I have any problem, I'm going to my doctor. If it's
Mhm.
mental, I go to a psychiatrist. If it's physical, I go to my general practitioner. And I learned a long time ago that general practitioners, God bless all the ones that are out there, and if you're listening, I'm not necessarily picking on you, but a general practitioner is just the art of knowing a whole lot without knowing anything. Like, I have
Yeah.
met some general practitioners that I'm like, what are the words coming out of your mouth right now? Like, what are you talking about? And so I started to get this sense that I'm like, man, this isn't as simple as, hey, just, eat what you want. Like,
Mhm.
I feel like we're at this diabolical opposition with the status quo, and that makes me sound like a conspiracy theorist. But the more people I talk to, that's why I started the podcast. Like, you're not the first person I've talked to that has had mental issues or thyroid issues or depression, and it turns into this where it just gets worse because they start prescribing
Right.
this stuff and it gets worse, and so then they keep prescribing it, and then they're like, well, in addition to this thing that's making you worse, I'm now going to add you medication which has a side effect, and because this has a side effect, I'm going to add you a medication that has a side effect for that. And
Yeah.
then you sit there and you go, what are we talking about? And my first aha moment for a story that's kind of similar to yours was Mikhail Peterson.
Yes.
And I think I've brought her up on every single podcast that I've done
Yes.
as a guest, as a host, because it truly highlights how absolutely crazy, especially from a physical standpoint, because
Mhm.
in addition to her depression, she had some crazy physical ailments. Like,
Yes. The arthritis. Yeah. She had like
you're
9 different
yeah,
arthritis
you're talking
diagnoses.
about a
Yeah.
7-year-old with arthritis. Like, that
Yeah.
is, you're not supposed to.
Yeah.
And now she had a baby and she's like
Mhm.
living and looking great. And I'm like, and I think it was at that moment that I was like, man, like there's something different. And then I got introduced to people like you, and then introduced to people like Mimi Morgan. And it just like, that's how I ended up where I am, and talking to people like you, because it's so crazy to me that you can go talk to a doctor who is trained, like they have spent years of their lives studying one specific discipline, and they can watch somebody get better in front of them and still think that they're wrong. Like,
Right.
how do you explain? Because I can't imagine that everybody comes from an evil place with that, right? Like, I have to feel like there's this brainwashing that's taken place that's keeping them from seeing this. But having experience with so many doctors, how do you explain that? Like, how do you explain them looking in your face and not realizing that nutrition is what's the cause of this?
Yeah. It's like a wall. It seems like they either don't have the time or don't want to look into anything new. They don't want to continue learning like Dr. Berry and Dr. Baker do. I mean, they both acknowledge that they doctor now differently than they did years ago because they have learned new things. And that's what you want your own practitioner to do. You want them to continually learn and change, as the saying goes, when you know better, you do better. But if they're not open to anything else except for dispensing a medication to try to cover a symptom, I don't know how we're supposed to function like that. And when I couldn't change it from the top down, that's when I thought, well, I'm just going to try to reach other people like me. And like you, I never intended on actually being public. I never intended on actually thinking that I would ever publicly speak and be on camera. I had my Twitter account and I was quiet on there. I had not posted anything. I'd never been on social media, but I had a Twitter account, and that's where I would just read all of the doctors that I had used as inspiration. And there was one post that Dr. Sean Baker put on about, do you think mental health could be impacted by what you eat? And I read through all these replies, and and there were so many on there that said, that's crazy. What you eat has nothing to do with diagnosed mental illness. And I had been praying, when should I get involved? When should I start speaking out? That was my aha moment of this is it. This is the time to get involved. And that's when I posted my very first post to his saying that it does impact. And it not only impacts, it actually heals. We're not talking about getting a little bit better. We're talking about complete 100% permanent healing. And it wasn't too long after that Nick Norowitz reached out to me and asked me to be a participant and a patient in the case series that he did with Michelle Hearn. And it just kind of skyrocketed from there. So yeah, I don't know what to do about that. I would love for things to change. I would love, whether it be mental health or physical health, to start looking at getting a doctor to sit down with you and, let's look at what your habits are. Let's look at what you eat. Even veterinarians do this. If you go in with your dog or a cat and they're losing their fur, the first thing a vet asks you is, what are you feeding it? Because they know the connection between dermatitis and fur loss and hair loss with whatever they're eating. But we can't go to a human doctor for ourselves and have them ask us, let's talk about what you're eating. And I think that comes from the push for veganism, the push for plant-based. The different dietitians and nutritionists that I had over the years in hospitals, they were never, ever going to get to the point to ask me, are you eating any animal protein? Because they were pushing me to not eat it. So that wasn't going to be a question from them to me of what are you eating? Because their whole goal was to get me to eat grains and seeds and nuts and wheat and beans and combine them in such a way as to get a complete protein. And not only did it not make my thoughts better, my mental health better, it wreaked havoc on my body, my gut. Just, that's where my irritable bowel syndrome came from, and, all these other physical ailments, the different vegetables and grains and beans. So then, then I wasn't even following that food plan either, because I felt physically ill trying to eat that way. So that's when I would relapse and quickly go back to, just starving. So.
It's so hard for me because I had like the very basic of it, right, from a mental standpoint. Because I don't have a crazy transformation. I don't have like, a lot of people that get into it and start getting passionate. It's because they were in a really bad place and then they got to a really good place. And I have posted a couple of mine, like, my physical health is not, it's better. It absolutely is better. But I had really good physical health throughout most of my 20s, right? And what's spurred me on is the benefits that I've gotten while still being able to look the same physically that I did 10 years ago. But then it is the mental aspect. And I was on, Dr. Tro.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was on his podcast the other day. And he's actually the first one that was like, yeah, you had a negative relationship with food. Like, you almost had this like PTSD with food. And I was like, well, I mean, not really. And then he's like, well, you just said that you planned your entire day around food. I'm like, well, yeah, I had to, because, if I went more than 4 or 5 hours, then I started, to get a little shaky, and then I'd be like, man, I got to get some food.
Yeah.
And, then if, we're going to have like a long day, I'm like, am I going to bring food? Or he's like, yeah, that's literally what you had. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I was totally fine. And now that I think about it, because the biggest change for me has just been, I can go 7, 8, 9 hours. And I've used my tattoo that I just got. The guy's like, yeah, it might take 6 or 7 hours for the session.
Yeah.
And my initial thought was like, what am I going to do for food? Because the last thing I want to do is be sitting there on a chair like 6 hours into it and start to feel a little shaky and be like, this is not going to be a good time. But since going carnivore, and this is even from animal-based, because I was animal-based for like a year, where I'd still minimal carbs. I mean, we're talking like 50 grams or less.
Yeah.
But I would still have to plan. And since going full carnivore and eliminating all the carbs, I sat through a 7-hour session, no problem. And I had an appointment before that. I went like 9 hours without eating. And by the time I got home, I was like, yeah, I'm hungry. I'm going to eat. But there's no part of my body that's like, bro, you need to pick it up and do it now, or we're not going to have a good time. And that was like the final aha where I'm like, man, this really has changed a lot. Because now my day is no longer revolved around food. Like, I don't have to, like, I haven't eaten yet today. And I was actually thinking about it, like, I was like, oh, like, I could eat now, or I could just, I want to get some stuff set up. I'll just eat afterwards. It's not a big deal. And never in my life would I have been like, whether I eat now or 2 hours later is not a big deal. Like, that's crazy to me, but that's so small. And then I talk to people like you, which is like not small. And I'm like, yeah, why? How can you not make that connection? Like, if it's meaningful for me and it's meaningful for you on both ends of these spectrums, how can we not have people go, I wonder if there's a whole group of people that we might be able to help if we just take a look at this. And so I applaud you a lot, because I see a lot of the stuff that you still get, especially from the vegan community. And I really applaud your perseverance and tenacity to keep going and just kind of like brush that off. Because I know it can be tough sometimes, right? Like, I get my fair share of hate, and most of the time I'm just like, yeah, whatever. Like,
I've grown a very tough skin.
Yes.
Yeah. And see, I naively thought years ago that I would have a voice with them. I really thought that. I don't anymore. But I really thought that I would, because I was only eating vegetables. I thought that they would be more compassionate towards me, especially after knowing how sick I was and what I healed. I thought at least they would give me a pass and just say, okay, yeah, I don't agree with what you're eating, but my gosh, you shouldn't even be alive today. And just say, okay, you do you. I thought I would get like a pass because I was only eating vegetables. But that has not been my experience at all. I have never, ever gotten on any vegan's profile on Twitter or Instagram and just decided to just spew a bunch of hate and tell them that they're wrong for eating what they're eating. I have never, ever done that. But it happens to me every single day. Every single day. They come on and they just come out of nowhere, where they just find me and find my post and just they're like a tick on a dog. They're just incessant. And you try, and I try the first or second time to try to have an adult discussion with them, send them a link of one of my posts or one of my videos, and try to explain to them to please be kind. I've healed from a lot, and I'm thankful to even be alive, let alone healed. And this is what I had to do to heal mental illness. This wasn't about me loving bacon and steak, although I do now. That wasn't what it was for me. This was about what I had to do at the end of 78 pounds, of what I had to do to heal. And that still doesn't satisfy them. They won't address that. They just come back with some bloody picture of a cow and that I'm torturing them. So, yeah, I either ignore them or I try a couple of times, or if it's really outrageous, I make an example of them. I make a post about it and get everybody else.
Which is usually what I'm like, we're coming in like it, and it's been really hard for me. And so I started on this from Paul Saladino, right? And I know there's a lot of people that disagree with him and think
he
he's
was
a
one
little
of the
out
very
there.
first books I read. I have his book. I read it cover to cover.
I do too.
John's book. Yeah.
And one of the things that I still appreciate about him is he's been on record multiple times saying, hey, if vegan is what's optimal for you, right? I don't think that it is.
Mm-hmm.
But if that is what's optimal for you, then do it. He's like, at the end of the day, that's what it is. We're all different ideas,
right?
But at the end of the day, the whole goal is to be optimal. And I've told vegans, I'm like, hey, good for you.
Me too.
I'm super glad that you've done this.
Your health is thriving. If you feel good, if you have no illness whatsoever, I'm happy for you. Now, return the favor.
Right?
Respect me the way that I'm giving you respect, and just let me live my life without spewing hate at it.
And the only thing I can think of, and this sounds super extreme, and I don't think I've ever actually told anybody this, so I might lose all my followers once I open my mouth. But I'm a big history buff, right? At least I was back in school. History was my favorite. And one of the more fascinating time periods for me was the 16th, 17th century, like the Spanish Inquisition, right? Which was Catholics and Protestants. Today, you look at a Catholic and Protestant, and the average person goes, yeah, they're a little bit different. They're both basically Christian, right? Yeah. Back then, you killed people over it, right? You literally tortured and killed people over it.
Yes.
And this is not to say this is the same, but how I view it is Catholicism was so threatened by Protestants that if that was allowed to gain hold and some people started to believe it, then your entire worldview would be shattered, right? If that's possible, then my world blows up.
Right. My gosh, it is the same thing, JT.
Well, when I talk to vegans, I'm like, you don't want this to be true, because if it is, then everything that you think is completely wrong.
That's true. Yeah, exactly.
And so they spend all of their time trying to break it down and saying, no, it's not right, or no, like you did something else, or because the very thought that you could do the opposite of what they're doing and still be healthy, it is completely earth-shattering to them. And then all of a sudden they have to question everybody that they've been told. And that starts from the very high. Now you're questioning the who, and then they're like, well, if the who's wrong about this, then what else are they wrong about? And now their entire world implodes.
Yeah, exactly. And that makes perfect sense of why they won't actually have a discussion back and forth with us about nutrition, about what's optimal, about their experience and what our experience is. Just yesterday, I was trying to have an adult discussion with somebody, and I'm assuming it was a she, I don't know. This person wouldn't even have a conversation. The only response was, have you ever been to a slaughterhouse? I'm talking about our mental health and what foods impact it. And this person never did address, that was 8 times. Have you ever been to a slaughterhouse? You ever been to a slaughterhouse? Over and over and over. And yet you're exactly right. They have to stick to the same set of questions, the same set of interrogation. Because if they don't, they actually might slip up and think about it. They actually might consider, so they have to continue pounding the same messaging and the same narrative that got them to go vegan in the first place.
Yeah, that's what's so like crazy to me. And so I get that question, right? You ever been to a slaughterhouse? I'm like, I don't need to. I literally I shot my first deer when I was 12 years old, like right out in front of my house. And then I called my dad and I was like, hey, Dad, now what do I do? I don't know what to do. And he's like, hold on, I'll call your grandpa and then we'll like get this figured out. Like, I know what happens. I am fully aware of the process that goes. I have literally done it. And the comeback is always, before I can even explain, the comeback is always, well, you're a psycho. Like that's literally the definition of psychotic. You have a disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm like, you realize you're here because your ancestors hunted. Like the ancestors that couldn't hunt, they don't have any descendants. Like they're not around anymore.
Right.
Like, so somewhere along the line, somebody was a decent hunter in your family. And I'm like, how have we come so far? Like, we raised cows. Like, it wasn't very many. We'd usually have one or two, but we bought a calf, raised it, slaughtered it, started all over. I had a very healthy appreciation when my food come. I had the ability to, disassociate what a pet is and what my food is.
Mm-hmm.
I had a conversation with my 5-year-old son talking about steak. And he said something about where steak comes from. I was like, well, buddy, steak actually comes from a cow. And he's like, huh? I was like, yeah, cow dies and you cut it up and then you get steak. And he's like, oh. So then the other day he gets in the car and he's like, steak comes from cows, Dad. I was like, you're right, it does. But it's the same thing. Like, you can't have this adult conversation where I'm like, why can we not just understand that this is, like, you can use whatever analogy you want. You can use the circle of life, like it's life, like it's just, this is how it works. And then it just derails into this, I call it word vomit. My favorite is a merry-go-round of word vomit. Like, that's all we're doing. We're just going like this and we're just spewing. But anyway, so have you talked to doctors recently? And
No.
still,
No.
yeah, and that's the theme.
No. I had some blood work done in 2019, just to check to make sure, everything was matching how I was feeling physically, mentally, my osteoporosis, that kind of stuff, because all the stuff I reversed. I did that just out of curiosity. I have not been to a doctor since. I ever since the shutdown and COVID and my relationship with doctors that deteriorated, I'll use them if I have some sort of trauma or, if there's something that happens that I can't figure out and heal myself, some sort of illness that I need antibiotics for, or, something of that nature, or some sort of trauma that I need to go to the ER. Other than that, I'm all doctored out.
I don't blame you.
Just
Like,
let me live my life. Just
people ask me,
I'm living to make up for. I'm having a happy good time. I don't want to spend the doctor's office.
People ask me, like, who's your general practitioner? I'm like, bro, I've had a general practitioner since I was 18 years old.
Yeah,
I got a bunch of orthopedic surgeons. I was good friends with a couple of orthopedic surgeons. General practitioner? No. Literally have not had one my entire life. I had a pediatrician until I was 18, and then I would continue to list it because they're like, well, who's your... I continued to write my pediatrician's name when you'd fill out health forms because I didn't have one. I'm like, I don't know. This guy? Like, I never call him anyway. But it's the same thing, and I don't know if you saw, did you see the study that Baker reposted this morning? I think it was this morning, about, or maybe it was yesterday, the LDL in relation to
to
BMI.
BMI. Yeah, because I follow Nick Nick Horowitz. So yes, I've been watching that closely, very closely.
And that one is super. That one backs up my whole view on carnivore, right? And so what people think is the nail in the coffin, like the final argument that I can't trump, is they're like, it doesn't matter how you feel now, right? It doesn't matter what your blood work is. And I've had doctors tell me this. One cardiologist in particular that has blocked me.
I know.
Because he doesn't like all the smoke I throw at him. They've told me that's cool, but these things take 10 to 20 years. So it doesn't matter what you're feeling now. It doesn't matter how much things have improved. You have 10 to 20 years and then you're going to have these problems. And my response has always been, the human body's amazing, right? The human body's amazing at telling you when it's good, when it's not good, and when you need to figure it out. Mm-hmm. So you're telling me that all of these things can improve mentally, physically, metabolically, like all of these things can improve. But 20 years down the line, your body's going to go, yeah, you know, when we told you that this was all better, just kidding.
Right.
And so then this study comes out for people who haven't seen it. The super synopsis of it is when people were on a low carb diet, the people who had the higher BMI, so the more obese population, had less effect on their LDL than the people with the lowest BMI. So the lowest BMI saw a great jump. I think it was almost 50% increase in their LDL-C, where the highest end of the BMI only saw a minor. And so you look at this and you look at the study and you go, okay, so what you're telling me is if I'm going to go low carb, it's healthier for me to stay a higher BMI because obesity is, wait, what? And that literally just plays into everything that I've done, that I've personally experienced and personally talked to, is you're telling me that I can have all of these health benefits, but because I have this one arbitrary number that goes up,
Mhm.
that I am now doing irreparable harm to myself. So how do you respond to that? Like, you're the most perfect example of this. How do you respond to somebody that says that to you?
One, there's a part of me that doesn't even care what my LDL is. If my choice is to go back to the way I was, to have a low LDL and not be consuming, any animal products, if my choice is to go back to mental illness, I don't, that's the part of me that says, I don't care what my LDL level is. I have a life now. I have sanity. I have everything that I've ever wanted. And that marker on a blood test, I'm not going to give that up. I'm not going to, do that. And two, I think there's so much that is not known because doctors don't test for it. We've been conditioned to believe that cholesterol is bad, whether it be total cholesterol, the different nuances of different levels, triglycerides, LDL, HDL. And it really doesn't make any sense to me because what's a baby's first food in nursing and breastfeeding?
The most cholesterol-rich
It's
food in
all
the world.
cholesterol, and that's what fuels and builds their strong, large brain, so that a baby's development, that baby can grow up to be a wonderful functioning child and a wonderful functioning adult. If cholesterol is so bad for us, why would women's bodies make it to be the sole food for our child? So the studies that support that cholesterol is bad, it's just crazy. When I was sick, my cholesterol levels were so low, and of course that was part of my cognitive issues too, because my total cholesterol was less than 90. Whose brain is going to function? You can't. So I'm not on that path of vilifying any of the numbers. I think the study that came out, I think it's going to help a lot of people who are lean mass hyperresponders, LMHRs. I think that's going to give them the evidence and give them more confidence when they do need to go to their doctor and the doctor tries to look at their numbers and bully them to go on a statin. I think that the study and all of the information that's now coming out independently is going to give them confidence. It's going to arm them with information, and they'll be able to look at their doctor and say, I've studied this and I don't agree. I don't agree that my LDL going up is bad for me if I'm having all of these other benefits. So I think the study is really going to help people to move forward and not question whether carnivore or keto or heavy animal based is going to eventually do them harm, because the evidence is there. If you have a lower BMI, it's going to go up, and that doesn't mean that your demise is coming for you.
Well, yeah, and one of the very first people that I found, I actually found his research and then found him on Twitter, is Dr. David Diamond. His
Oh, yes. Yep.
his Twitter is LDL Skeptic,
Yes.
and because that was a big one with mine too. I'm like, 'cause I come from a science background. I have a bachelor's in science in sports medicine, and I've taken the A&P classes, and so intuitively I'm like, well, that number's not supposed to go up. And this is before I'd gotten any blood work. And so I'm like, well, let's do some research, because that is the other thing that you learn. And the frustrating part is because one of the big things you learn in any type of medical, whether it's undergrad, I have a master's as well, whether you have undergrad or postgraduate or medical school, one of the things they teach you is how to look up information.
Right.
They tell you, hey, we're going to teach you some basics. We don't expect you to remember all of this, but we're going to teach you how to look stuff up.
Mm-hmm.
And so the ability to go through a study and pick out the key points of it. And so when I was going through, I landed on his, and I believe the title is Why Statins Are Not Warranted for Patients with High LDL, but this isn't the exact, but a good triglyceride to HDL ratio. And so then I was looking through it, and I'm like, okay, that makes sense. It makes sense that just because your LDL goes up, if you also have improvements like your physical fitness, there's another study that correlates physical fitness with your HDL triglyceride ratio. But if your HDL goes up as well, and your triglycerides come down, and you're in better physical condition and you have less body fat, it stands to reason that, okay, maybe there's more to the story than just LDL. And that's a really hard one for people to get their minds across. I go like this with more non-carnivore people than anything else on the cholesterol. And my goal is not to tell you, hey, don't worry about LDL. That's not my goal. My goal is to say, hey, there's research suggesting that it may not be that bad. And for people wondering, I think when I did mine was like 200 LDL, which is not. If I go to a doctor right now, they're going to try and put me on a statin.
Mm-hmm.
But I have excellent HDL and triglyceride. I think I'm about 1.3, 1.2 ratio. With, when you look at the study I was quoting on physical fitness, if you are the top end of physical fitness with a ratio under 1.5, that puts you at the lowest all-cause mortality bracket. I'm like, okay, that makes sense to me, because you can't tell me that I'm getting healthier, I'm feeling better, I'm losing weight, I'm gaining muscle, I'm doing all these things, but because my LDL, now I have to get on a statin.
Right.
And the frustrating part for me, especially with the doctor, which we won't name, is he has said this. That's fine. If you want to eat your steak, that's fine. Let us treat what it causes. So you're telling me to continue to do what I do as long as you let me put you on a statin. That's what you want to do. Yeah, eat whatever you want. That's fine. Just come in so I can write you a statin prescription, because I got to make the payment for my Porsche.
That's what people do with diabetes.
Out of here.
You can eat whatever you want as long as you mitigate it with insulin. Go ahead, eat what you want, and we'll just adjust your insulin to treat what you ate. It's the same mindset. It's crazy.
That's the ADA. I follow a couple, a type 1 diabetic doctor, Dr. Ryan.
Yeah, I just watched your interview with him.
Yeah, he's a diabetic, and he has equally, if not better, blood sugar than I do, as a type 1 diabetic, which is unheard of. And he manages it, and he consistently will repost what the American Diabetes Association posts out, and it's exactly what you said. It's like, hey, enjoy this delicious recipe with a cup of sugar. Not a cup of total sugar. You are adding sugar to this recipe.
Added sugar.
And you're like,
yeah, and we'll just adjust your insulin.
Enjoy your favorite dessert. Just make sure you have your, you get your finger prick and you get enough insulin so you don't go into diabetic as a shock. What on earth are we doing? And
there's no informed consent. These people that are doing that, they have not researched it to understand that every time that their blood sugar goes crazy high and then they force it to go crazy low with the insulin, they're harming their organs. They're harming their heart, their pancreas, their kidneys. Doctors aren't sitting them down to tell them the long-term side effects of uncontrolled diabetes. That you're going to lose organs and limbs because of the crazy highs and the crazy lows. People don't understand that.
Which is crazy to me, because one of the very first things, so I have a fairly photographic memory, right?
Me too.
Especially like test taking. Like if you told me what it is, or if they gave like practice tests, like I was always going to do well. And I still remember certain definitions. And one of the ones that always pops out to me is, I like science and physics, right? Physics is a science, but you know what I'm saying. Homeostasis. And then the fact that every object, if it's at rest, it wants to stay at rest.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, like the body wants to be, homeostasis is it wants to find an even keel place. It doesn't want to spike. It doesn't want to go crazy. It wants to find this nice baseline, and it wants to stay there as much as possible. Like you have to force your body out of this. And to not apply these basic principles to like diet and diabetes and all of this, like, no, it's okay. It's okay if it spikes. We're just going to use a medication to bring it back down. Like your body, like you are the literal proof from every aspect, physical, like anybody. I'm gonna attach a before and after. Like you can just look at you from a physical standpoint and know that crazy things happened. And then you talk to you and you realize also the mental, like you cannot tell me that your body has not found its homeostasis where it wants to be, and yet there are still people out there who are like, no, you need to change it.
Yeah. And the first year that I healed, people think that things got better because I gained weight. And when I revealed to them that 12 months that my mental illnesses healed, I had not gained a pound. I did not gain any weight the first year. I was still less than 80 pounds. That's the proof that weight gain or weight restoration does not have any impact on your mental health if it's done through anything other than meat and fat. It was years 2 through 4 that I then began a journey of rebuilding my body and gained 45 pounds of muscle with 3 pounds of meat every day and heavy weight training. So, yeah.
Well, I could literally talk to you all day, Valerie. At the risk of this turning into a marathon episode.
Yeah, I could too. We could sit here all afternoon and talk.
For anybody who does not follow Valerie, you have to. You and Mimi are the two, like, if anybody ever has any like issues or like reservations, I don't even tell them to do it. I'm like, just literally go look at these people. Like, for people who haven't, Mimi was one of my first guests on here. Literal deathbed from physical like infections and rheumatoid arthritis and a Parkinson's diagnosis and just like a stroke. And what I love about you two is you both post these pictures working out and you're strong and you're lifting heavy. And it's like, even if it was just this, even if you guys had no problems throughout your entire lives, it'd still be like, hey, look, that's pretty cool. You can still do this. And then to hear both your guys' stories, it's amazing. I absolutely love it. So for people that want to follow along, where are you on social media? What are your handles? How do they get in contact with you?
Okay. The same handle on Twitter and Instagram. Valerie Ann 1970. 1970 is the year I was born, so I thought it would be easy to stick with that. Valerie Ann has an E on the end of the Ann. So you can get in touch with me on both platforms. Direct message me on both platforms. I volunteer phone counsel. I've got about 12 people that right now that I interact with that have reached out to me, and it's difficult to really delve into details and help when there's so many questions. and whether it has to do with mental health or physical health. So I usually just give them my cell phone and say, let's set up time to just talk for an hour on the phone. Let's talk about all your questions and see what we can get you started for where you're feeling right now, and make a plan. Because there's just so many ways of doing this, and one size does not fit all. You can't tell somebody that keto, super high fat, lower protein, and all these vegetables is going to work for every single person, because it didn't for me. But there are plenty of people who are doing carnivore that do a high fat carnivore, and that has helped their mental issues. That didn't work for me either. I can't handle the extra high fat. I have to do super, super high protein and moderate fat. So I never tell anybody what to eat. I help them discover what's the best way for them. And they can tell me, what they're eating and how they're feeling and what certain foods make them feel like. And I can make suggestions of, well, maybe that one, maybe you're getting indigestion from the eggs and the milk. Have you ever tried eliminating them and see how you feel? Maybe you're getting too full too fast and you're not building muscle because you're eating this one stick of butter and you're hardly on any protein, and you're full and you can't eat anymore. So you're not hitting your protein macros and you're not going to build any muscle that way. So all of us are just so different, and my approach is helping them figure out what's the best way for them, because there is no one perfect way for every single person. And if you say that there is, you're losing people. People aren't going to come to you for help if you're dogmatic about this is the way, this is the only way, and if that doesn't work for you, well, then you didn't do it good enough or right enough. Because that's what we get from the vegan community. Oh, I was vegan and it didn't work. Well, then you didn't do it right. And we don't need to translate that into the carnivore community. We need to be loving and supportive and come alongside the new ones and help them figure it out. Not tell them that they're eating wrong or that they're doing it wrong. We need to be a voice for them and to help them figure it out.
That might be one of my favorite things that you've said this entire time, because I could not agree more. Everybody is different.
Yeah,
And
they are.
Yeah, the dogma, I call them the protectors of the dogma. I am very much anti that, and it's a lot of why I do what I do, and stuff that I leave in my videos or items that I cook with is because of that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's awesome to hear you say that. Yeah, if anybody, if you guys just want inspiration, go follow Valerie. If you want help, follow Valerie. I love seeing all your posts. You post a lot of great stuff. And the best part is you highlight a lot of people that, when people are asking questions, and you just highlight other accounts, which I think is awesome. If somebody's looking for a certain resource, hey, go check this person out, watch this video, so it's absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much for coming on here. I greatly enjoyed it. I'm glad we could make this work. Congratulations on your grandson. Enjoy. Yeah, everybody go give a follow. I will link her accounts on the one that I post this, and thank you everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.